Capitalist view of individual freedom and the authority of the state. Capitalism is based on the notion of the modern state that is a result of the collective authority vested in the government to seek the common good of the state. This is in contrast with the medieval system, where kings and nobles were believed to have absolute power vested in them by God through priests. Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, written in 1651, argues that human societies are destined to descend into anarchy unless it has a government or a sovereign authority that rules over it. In this process, the government's power is a collection of the individual rights of the citizens that is granted to the government to create a commonwealth that would meet the needs of the community. This view of Hobbes has become the basis of the Anglo-American political ideology, where states are formed by the individual citizens who cede their individual rights to the sovereign, who has to rule by performing certain functions. Thus, most capitalist commentators argue that the authority of the state is created only for the purpose of protecting the individual freedom of all citizens. As such, any government's authority is limited by the power vested in them by the individual citizens. If the government does more than what the people have collectively vested in it, that government will be going beyond the power and authority that is vested in them, and that is illegal. Hence, the first point is that the main duty and role of the state is to preserve individual freedom. If any government fails to respect individual freedom of its citizens, that state is acting illegally and must be held accountable for it by the citizens. The second argument, put forward by Friedrich von Hayek, is that individual freedom must be construed in the context of the phrase freedom for. In other words, a proper government will not grant its citizens the freedom to do certain things. That is not within the power of the government. The government must create a situation where the individual citizens have the freedom for the pursuit of their own self-interests. Stated differently, the government is a result of the individual rights of the people, combined into a sovereign authority. As such, by default, the government has no authority to determine what the citizen can or cannot do. Rather, the government's business is to allow citizens to do what they, the citizens, want for themselves. Therefore, the government must guarantee the individual's freedom for whatever each individual wants. We all know of cases in history where many governments arose that had labels like Land of Freedom and Democratic, among others. However, these governments kept their citizens under massive oppression. These were the governments that had labor camps and some of the worst human rights records. What Friedrich von Hayek is saying is that the government that determines what the citizens are free to do and not to do is totalitarian. With the notable exception of certain universal things that all citizens agree must be banned and restricted, no government has any right to set limits to whatever its citizens do. Rather, the government's duty is to help its citizens to achieve whatever the citizens aspire to achieve, not the other way around. In a truly democratic capitalist state, the citizens are the end, and the government is the means to that end. When the government becomes the end or goal, the citizens become a means to an end, and this government is one that breeds tyranny. Thus, the concept of freedom is only established when the government enables its citizens to pursue their goals and ends, rather than limit what they can or cannot do. Friedrich von Hayek goes on to state that the concept of freedom guaranteed by the state is based on two main things. Number one, the individual citizen's desires and aspirations. And number two, the productive nature of these desires and aspirations. Therefore, a state that is built on true freedom allows its citizens to pursue their own personal desires and aspirations. Secondly, these desires and aspirations must be productive in nature. Human freedom is individual, and it has to be one that will allow a person to pursue the goals and desires they want in an individual sense, without any external manipulations. In line with this, Milton Friedman argues that total freedom equates to individual liberties. This should be free of direct and indirect manipulations. To Friedman, individual freedom is necessary to attain true political freedom. This is because when individual freedom is diminished, government becomes centralized and gains too much power. That automatically leads to the abuse of the political rights of the citizens. This is because it is only when the individual's right to freedom is absolute and protected in the Constitution that the state can be held accountable for its acts. In the absence of the protection of individual rights, the state will become too powerful, and the citizens will be serving the state instead of the state serving the needs of its individual citizens. When a person has rights that they can waive against the state is also under checks and balances, and they will be careful with whatever resources they get to use. This creates a second layer of democracy that goes beyond the mere doctrine of separation of political powers, which does not in itself guarantee that the state will function for the betterment of the society. A country with an independent judiciary, executive, and legislative can only work for a few people's interest and effectively enslave the vast majority. It is only through individual rights to freedom for the attainment of their own happiness that the state can be scrutinized regularly and forced to do what is in the best interest of the people.